What if I told you that true danger isn't merely the absence of intelligence, but something far more insidious, a creeping force that can transform even the most brilliant minds into instruments of destruction? Imagine a world where the greatest threat to civilization isn't overtly evil acts, but rather ordinary individuals who have simply ceased to engage their critical faculties. Envision this. A highly acclaimed scientist, adorned with accolades and degrees, suddenly begins to champion and disseminate hazardous misinformation. A once empathetic teacher finds themselves advocating for harmful ideologies. A loving parent starts making choices that directly imperil their own children. These aren't malevolent figures. They are intelligent, well-intentioned people who have unwittingly succumbed to what Dietrich Bonhoeffer powerfully termed the power of stupidity. And here's the truly chilling part. This isn't an abstract phenomenon happening to some distant them. It's unfolding right now, among people just like you and me. This isn't just theoretical musing. Cast your mind back to 1961, when Stanley Milgram conducted his infamous obedience experiments at Yale University. Ordinary volunteers, under the instruction of an authority figure, were led to believe they were administering increasingly painful electric shocks to another individual. Despite hearing heart-wrenching screams of agony, a staggering 65% of participants delivered what they believed to be potentially lethal shocks. These weren't sadists or individuals with malicious intent. They were everyday people who had temporarily relinquished their capacity for independent moral judgment. This unsettling dynamic is precisely what Bonhoeffer observed firsthand in Nazi Germany, prompting him to forge one of the most profound and disquieting theories about human nature ever conceived. But before we delve deeper into Bonhoeffer's insights, I have a question for you. Have you ever found yourself embracing a belief simply because everyone around you seemed to? Hold on to that thought as we embark on a journey to explore what might be one of the most crucial psychological revelations of our modern era. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was no armchair philosopher, secluded in an ivory tower, contemplating abstract concepts. He was a German Lutheran pastor who witnessed the complete metamorphosis of his society before his very eyes. Born in 1906 into a family steeped in intellect, his father was a distinguished psychiatrist and neurologist. Bonhoeffer had every reason to place his faith in the power of education and rational discourse. Yet, as the Nazi Party ascended to power, Bonhoeffer bore witness to something that irrevocably shattered his belief in human rationality. He watched in disbelief as his fellow Germans, educated, cultured, and ostensibly religious individuals, began to fervently support policies and leaders that starkly contradicted every principle they claimed to uphold. These weren't uninformed masses swayed by cunning propaganda. These were professors, doctors, clergy members, and intellectuals who were actively, almost eagerly participating in their own intellectual capitulation. From his desolate prison cell in 1943, awaiting execution for his involvement in a plot to assassinate Hitler, Bonhoeffer penned what would become his most haunting observation. Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Neither protests nor the use of force accomplish anything here. Reasons fall on deaf ears. What made this particular observation so chilling wasn't just its grim context, but its unnerving precision. Evil, he astutely noted, always carries within itself the germ of its own subversion. It creates unease, resistance, eventual breakdown. But stupidity? It believes it's doing good, making it utterly impervious to correction. Perhaps Bonhoeffer's most prescient insight was his understanding of how stupidity inherently serves existing power structures. Malicious individuals are acutely aware that their actions are wrong, fostering internal conflict and ultimately leading to their downfall. However, those ensnared in functional stupidity genuinely believe they are acting righteously, rendering them absolutely resistant to any form of correction. This isn't mere coincidence. Those wielding power no longer need to overtly suppress information. They simply need to cultivate conditions where the honest processing of information becomes prohibitively arduous. When Bonhoeffer invoked the word stupidity, he wasn't referring to a low IQ or a lack of formal schooling. He was dissecting something far more intricate, what we might term functional stupidity, or willful ignorance. In his poignant letters from prison, he elaborated, "The fact that the stupid person is often stubborn must not blind us to the fact that he is not independent. In conversation with him, one virtually feels that one is dealing not at all with him as a person, but with slogans, catchwords, and the like that have taken possession of him." Herein lies the truly revolutionary core of Bonhoeffer's theory. He posited that stupidity frequently arises not from individual shortcomings, but from pervasive systemic pressures that render independent thought both challenging and costly. The stark reality is that our economic systems actively incentivize intellectual shortcuts. Social media platforms rake in billions when users react impulsively and emotionally, rather than engaging in critical thought. News outlets garner more clicks by generating outrage than by delivering nuanced perspectives. Politicians secure victories with simplistic slogans instead of comprehensive policy proposals. When individuals are juggling multiple jobs, burdened by debt, and relentlessly barraged with information, intellectual surrender transforms into a genuine survival strategy. What economists refer to as rational ignorance emerges. It becomes more efficient for individuals to remain uninformed about complex issues than to invest the substantial time and energy required for genuine comprehension. Yet, this individual rationality paradoxically breeds collective irrationality, precisely the dynamic Bonhoeffer witnessed in Nazi Germany. The outcome isn't merely a string of individual choices. It's a powerful structural push towards intellectual capitulation. And our brains, stressed and overwhelmed, are perfectly primed to comply. While economic systems nudge us towards intellectual shortcuts, our brains are, in fact, hardwired to comply. Leon Festinger's groundbreaking research on cognitive dissonance in the 1950s meticulously revealed the psychological mechanics at play. When people encounter information that clashes with their deeply held beliefs, their brains instinctively fight to reject it. But here's the crucial insight Bonhoeffer grasped, and modern psychology has emphatically confirmed. This process is dramatically amplified when individuals are stressed, overwhelmed, or economically insecure. Precisely the conditions our contemporary systems often foster. Bonhoeffer keenly observed that stupidity frequently manifests within group settings. He wrote, with chilling clarity, that it becomes clear that stupidity is not a psychological problem, but a sociological one. He noticed that even perfectly rational individuals would discard their critical thinking abilities the moment they became integrated into a larger group or movement. This insight was decades ahead of its time. Solomon Asch's conformity experiments in the 1950s provided empirical validation for exactly what Bonhoeffer had witnessed. When surrounded by a group offering obviously incorrect answers, a startling 75% of people would align themselves with the crowd at least once, even when they knew the group was wrong. Now, Imagine how this dynamic plays out in our hyper-connected digital age. Social media algorithms, designed to maximize engagement, meticulously craft echo chambers that make this intellectual transformation easier than ever before. A 2018 study by MIT researchers startlingly revealed that false information disseminates 6 times faster than truthful information on social platforms. But here's the critical underlying reason. False information often elicits a more emotionally satisfying response than complex truths. When someone shares misinformation that validates their existing worldview, they are inadvertently participating in a system that rewards intellectual shortcuts over diligent analysis. The algorithm, in turn, feeds them more of the same, creating intellectual quicksand that feels deceptively comfortable. Have you ever noticed how your social media feed seems to uncannily present you with exactly what you want to see? That's not mere happenstance. It's the meticulously designed architecture of chosen ignorance in full swing. We observe this pattern repeating itself throughout history, a grim testament to its enduring power. The Salem witch trials, for instance, weren't orchestrated by inherently evil individuals, but by devout, God-fearing community members who genuinely believed they were safeguarding their neighbors. The Red Scare of the 1950s wasn't fueled by malicious actors, but by patriotic Americans who sincerely believed they were staunchly defending democracy. In each historical instance, intelligent, educated people willingly abandoned critical thinking in favor of group consensus and the seductive certainty of emotion. If our brains and the very systems we inhabit are seemingly rigged against us, how do we effectively fight back? Bonhoeffer believed that breaking free from the shackles of stupidity demands what he termed costly grace, the unwavering willingness to think independently, even when it is painful, unpopular, or downright dangerous. But now, with our enhanced understanding, we realize we're not merely battling social pressure. We are contending with millions of years of evolutionary wiring and multi-billion-dollar algorithms meticulously engineered to exploit our inherent mental shortcuts. On an individual level, we can actively cultivate what psychologists refer to as intellectual humility. The profound recognition that our knowledge is perpetually incomplete and inherently fallible. This necessitates actively seeking out information that contradicts our deeply held beliefs, not as a form of self-inflicted torture, but as a rigorous test to determine whether our convictions are truly worthy of allegiance. Here are some concrete practices that can serve as your daily resistance against intellectual surrender. First, cultivate intellectual friction. Dedicate time each week to conscientiously read thoughtful arguments from individuals who fundamentally disagree with you. The goal isn't necessarily to alter your perspective, but to rigorously test whether your existing convictions can withstand genuine scrutiny. Second, embrace productive ignorance. When you find yourself absolutely certain about something, ask yourself, what specific evidence, if presented, would genuinely change my mind? If you cannot conceive of any, that's a significant red flag. Third, deliberately slow down your sharing. Before you post anything online, take a full 60 seconds to independently verify the information from a credible, unbiased source. That brief, intentional pause can effectively disrupt the algorithmic cycle that thrives on our immediate emotional reactions. Finally, practice the courageous act of saying, "I don't know," when you genuinely lack knowledge about something. In a world that often rewards confident ignorance over humble uncertainty, admitting gaps in your understanding becomes a truly radical act. However, individual practices alone are insufficient. We also desperately need fundamental structural changes that make intellectual honesty both easier and more rewarding. This demands requiring social media platforms to transparently disclose their algorithmic biases and the precise mechanisms by which they curate content. It means significantly funding comprehensive public media literacy campaigns that equip individuals with the essential skills to critically evaluate sources and evidence. It means meticulously designing online platforms that actively reward intellectual humility over tribal certainty. Most importantly, we need progressive economic policies that alleviate the pervasive stress and uncertainty that render people so vulnerable to intellectual shortcuts. When individuals are not constantly consumed by anxieties about healthcare, housing, and employment, they gain the crucial mental bandwidth necessary for careful, deliberate thinking about complex issues. Bonhoeffer's theory was undeniably brilliant for its time, but here's what he couldn't possibly have known. This isn't solely about moral surrender or societal pressure. Modern neuroscience unveils something far more disquieting. Our brains are quite literally wired to succumb to functional stupidity. Consider this. Bonhoeffer witnessed Nazi propaganda disseminating through newspapers and radio broadcasts. But we are living through something exponentially more perilous. We have evolved from the relatively crude methods of Nazi propaganda to sophisticated social media algorithms that possess an uncanny ability to identify and exploit our precise psychological vulnerabilities. And now, we are on the precipice of the age of AI-powered deepfakes that can effortlessly fabricate reality itself. The threat isn't merely escalating, it's directly targeting the very architecture of human cognition. This isn't just a historical anecdote about Nazis or propaganda, it's about the intricate wiring of your own brain. Our minds evolved to prioritize speed over meticulous accuracy, to instinctively trust familiar sources over unfamiliar ones, and to actively seek out information that confirms what we already believe. These were once vital survival features that enabled our ancestors to make swift decisions when hesitation meant potential death. The most terrifying realization? We are all vulnerable, regardless of how intelligent we perceive ourselves to be. The underlying mechanism is precisely what Bonhoeffer meticulously described. When people feel threatened and uncertain, they become far more susceptible to authoritative-sounding explanations that ruthlessly reduce complexity to simplistic, reassuring narratives. But here's the crucial insight that makes Bonhoeffer's profound warning more urgent than ever before. We are no longer solely dealing with human manipulation. We are confronting systems designed by artificial intelligence to exploit our cognitive vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Every single click, every fleeting pause, every emotional reaction is being meticulously analyzed and weaponized against our innate capacity for independent thought. We witness this terrifying phenomenon unfold in real time during COVID-19. Doctors, engineers, and lawyers, individuals with demonstrably keen analytical abilities, began to fervently share debunked theories about vaccines and treatments. These were not failures of intelligence. They were profound failures of intellectual independence under unprecedented, overwhelming pressure. Bonhoeffer paid the ultimate price for his unwavering refusal to surrender his intellectual independence. He was tragically executed by hanging on April 9, 1945, mere weeks before Germany's final surrender. His last words, as recounted by a fellow prisoner, were, "This is the end for me, the beginning of life." His profound sacrifice wasn't merely about political resistance. It was about heroically defending the very possibility of authentic human thought. He understood that when individuals cease to think independently, they cease to be fully human. They become, in his haunting words, puppets whose strings are pulled by whatever force happens to be strongest at the moment. But here's what makes Bonhoeffer's ultimate challenge so profoundly relevant today. Who stands fast? When the pressure to conform becomes overwhelming, when thinking independently demands genuine courage, when the cost of truth significantly outweighs the temporary comfort of convenient lies, who among us will stand fast? The answer is not found in superior intelligence or extensive education. It is found in the everyday choice to cultivate curiosity rather than cling to certainty, to relentlessly seek truth rather than comfortable illusions, to think carefully rather than react impulsively. These are not heroic, grand gestures. They are ordinary daily practices that become extraordinary when everyone else around you has ceased to perform them. The profound tragedy is that intellectual surrender often feels liberating. Thinking is inherently hard work. It is deeply uncomfortable to simultaneously hold complex, often contradictory ideas within your mind. It is painful to admit that you might be fundamentally wrong about something you hold dear. Yet, Bonhoeffer argued that this discomfort is the unavoidable price of remaining truly human. In a world that actively profits from our intellectual capitulation, choosing to think for ourselves becomes an inherently radical act. This brings us to perhaps the most uncomfortable truth of all. We are all susceptible to functional stupidity. The very moment we entertain the notion that we are immune, we have already begun our descent. The price of intellectual freedom is eternal vigilance, not against external enemies, but against our own inherent tendency to stop thinking when thinking becomes arduous. Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity is unsettling precisely because it is so devastatingly accurate. We witness its manifestations everywhere. Intelligent people embracing demonstrably false claims, educated individuals making catastrophically poor decisions, well-meaning citizens enthusiastically supporting policies that fundamentally contradict their own values. The core problem isn't that people are somehow becoming less intelligent. It's that our prevailing systems increasingly reward intellectual shortcuts over diligent, careful thought. Yet, within this sobering diagnosis lies genuine hope. If stupidity is, in part, a choice, then it can also be consciously rejected. If it is partly structural, then structures can be fundamentally altered. If it is the result of cognitive overwhelm, then we can actively create conditions that make thinking easier rather than harder. Consider critical thinking akin to physical exercise. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but it is absolutely essential for intellectual strength. Just as we wouldn't expect to effortlessly run a marathon without rigorous training, we cannot expect to skillfully navigate complex information without consistently practicing intellectual discipline. The mental muscles required for independent thought demand regular use, or they will inevitably atrophy. The next time you find yourself absolutely certain about something, the next time you catch yourself dismissing contradictory evidence without even a moment of consideration, the next time you bask in the comforting glow of having all the answers, remember Bonhoeffer's chilling warning. Functional stupidity doesn't announce itself with a grand fanfare. It whispers insidiously that you already know everything you need to know. And in that crucial moment of recognition, you are faced with a profound choice. Will you surrender your mind for the alluring comfort of certainty? Or will you choose the more arduous, yet infinitely more rewarding path of intellectual independence? The question Bonhoeffer leaves us with isn't whether we are inherently smart enough to avoid stupidity. It is whether we are committed enough to persistently keep thinking, even when thinking becomes inconvenient, uncomfortable, or costly. In a world that actively profits from our intellectual surrender, choosing to think carefully and independently becomes one of the most paramount actions we can undertake. Here is my challenge to you for this week. Identify one deeply held belief you possess and dedicate 30 minutes to thoroughly researching the most compelling arguments against it. Not to torture yourself, and certainly not to become paralyzed by doubt, but to practice the very kind of intellectual courage that Bonhoeffer bravely died defending. If your belief robustly survives honest scrutiny, you will hold it with even greater conviction. If it doesn't, you will have gained invaluable insight into the profound difference between mere conviction and genuine truth. The future of human dignity might very well depend on how we collectively answer Bonhoeffer's powerful challenge. If this video has prompted you to question something you previously held with unwavering certainty, that is not a sign of weakness. It is the very genesis of intellectual courage. Share this video with someone who isn't afraid to think deeply, even when it feels uncomfortable. Because in a world meticulously designed to profit from our intellectual surrender, the simple, profound act of thinking carefully becomes the most vital form of resistance we possess. And here's the enduring message I want you to carry with you. Every single time you choose curiosity over certainty, evidence over raw emotion, careful thinking over impulsive reactions, you are not merely protecting your own mind. You are actively defending the very possibility of human wisdom in an age increasingly defined by artificial stupidity. What's one belief you are willing to courageously question this week? Let me know in the comments below. And together, let us commit to being the kind of people who stand fast when everyone else has simply stopped thinking.